And first on the agenda here is this discussion with Gary/Slam on the proposed Justice Center and jail. Who is going to lead this discussion?
You guys are ready. I'm here. Barbara, can you hear me, or Dennis? Yeah. Okay, go ahead. If you guys want to go ahead, you can.
You guys ready for us to start?
We are.
Yes. Yes, please go forward.
All right, thank you. Look, it wouldn't be 2020 if we didn't have some blizzards, so this is part of the course. Let me introduce myself. My name is Sept. I'm an architect and a principal with SLAM. We were, the hearing office was acquired by SLAM back in March when all this COVID began, and so it's just an interesting transition for us. But the same folks that have been up there and working with you, same leadership and same team. That team that's on the phone call today includes Barbara Valella. She's a senior interior designer and programmer. She's responsible for much of the program development that kind of serves as the guidepost for our studies. And I've got Jessica Mallow, who's project architect and worked on some of the analysis that we're going to share with you today. She's part of that team. And then Linda Bennett is a civil engineer, and she was part of the team was up there to look at the site, and has been instrumental in our development of these really test fits, if you will, for how this program of justice and with detention and sheriff would fit within that. So we're going to walk through PowerPoint, and if you can see, I apologize if some of these images are going to be small. We can throw it if we need to, but we wanted to cover this agenda, and the agenda consists of really 4 components. So we have a quick overview of the programming, which is really numbers and square footages, and we can talk about how we got to these, and these have been vetted really a number of times. We have some basic site analysis of the parcel that we're studying. We'll look at what we call stacking and blocking, which is different ways we would organize the various functional components. And then we've developed some ideas about how the site could be developed, and some preliminary mapping, and some preliminary images that I don't want to really say that we've designed the building yet. We've really just illustrated ways that we could develop this into a new justice center for the county. So I'll do the programming review, and I apologize. This is, I'm sure, on some of these screens. Let me kind of just give you the highlights of this. So the summary of the program really includes 9 different divisions. One of the divisions is really a support. So we include the lobby, some of the various shared support pieces. It would include, toilet rooms and janitor's closets and storage and some of those things. So that's one of the 9 divisions. The primary users of the building include the courts, both number at the bottom, the total square footage, this is around 58,000 square feet. Now, we have also introduced, as a result of this analysis, we suggested that a potential efficiency that primarily affects the jail and detention, and we would compress that number down to a little below 56,000 square feet. Same operations, it's just, we just looked at a way that we might alter the dormitory layout and really the sleeping arrangements within there to get the same capacity, but just a little bit more efficient strategy. And that was really driven by looking at how the building would actually nest in a multiple floor arrangement. So, again, we can make all this available. So these are the individual departmental sheets that start to break down space by space. And I know it's really probably difficult for us to get into this kind of detail, but these are the 9 different pieces that we went through. The cornerstone of this is really for what is for us, given county standards, to be a large courtroom. It's got, capacity for 100 plus in the gallery, spectator seating. We would have 14-person jury box. We have a large well that could be flexible in terms of how we set it up. And I should note that all of these would be include provisions for accessibility. So everything that the public would be engaged in, and that would include attorneys. We're making provisions to give you ADA compliance. So we have space for wheelchair seating in the gallery, in the jury. We have accessible ramps for to make the witness box, the jury box. Even in this case, the clerk's positions are all accessible within the room itself. We have a second kind of judicial space, which is a smaller hearing room, kind of a multi-purpose space, but again, similar logic in terms of how it's going to be designed and laid out. And this is kind of some simple plan axiometric of how that space might work. The other large space within the building is a jury assembly. And that breakdown includes, a check-in station. There is a small kitchen. We have a variety of kind of spaces for potential jurists. So there are some carols. There are some kind of a more auditorium style, maybe some incorporating some lounge seating in there as well. But we find these to be kind of multi-purpose spaces because they're going to have the capability for audio visual in there. These get used a lot for training. There are a lot of functions of really a nice asset for the county to have and utilize it in a number of ways. But it is also kind of the cornerstone of the jurist experience, and they're part of it in the building. Any questions about the basic program? Again, we can make those spreadsheets available, and we can drill into it if you'd like to. But round numbers, we're looking at 56 to 58,000 square feet total square footage to get everybody in one new building that has capacity for growth. Move forward, again, we can come back to this if you need to, but just to keep rolling here, let's look at the site, the parcel. And Linda, I don't want to put you on the spot. Do you want to maybe just do an overview of our analysis of the site?
Sure, I can. currently runs through the middle of the site, including some overhead power and sanitary sewer lines that will have to be relocated no matter really what building we do. And then, we always had the question, will our buildings that we're, programming out and the parking needed for it actually fit on the site? So, we kind of looked at it from that standpoint too. Will everything actually fit? Trying to find the most efficient building layout, and we did a study of the amount of parking that we think that we will need, and we actually analyzed that in 3 different ways. We looked at, what we typically do for courthouse projects, because we've got considerable experience throughout the country that we can use as comparable. Certainly Haywood County is one of them. And then we also looked at sort of a code requirement for parking for civic and social buildings. And although we couldn't find anything specific for Graham County, we sort of looked in Charlotte, we looked in Asheville code, and we were having possibly having jury duty on the same day. So, if as you get further into your planning with user group meetings in the future, that can be drilled down, quite a bit more. But that's sort of our goal of what we're trying to do. We look at
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, we could look at, that's that total number. There may be some primary, surface parking, and we may have some like overflow parking that isn't, developed in the same manner. So there's strategies we can employ to get you to that maximum number. But these test fits all kind of work around those basic parking principles, those numbers.
right. And then of course we analyzed the site for not only the slope.
So let's look at how some of this might come together. We studied a number of different ideas, a number of options that looked at how you take your base program and put it together in a functional, efficient footprint. And again, we're conscious of the slope so that we are envisioning the buildings kind of nested into the build, and we're using part of the building to, in effect, retain, or it would present itself as 2 stories perhaps on street frontage, but at the other side might be a single story. And then just trying to be efficient about how that would work. It lends itself to these linear options, and it also lends it a division that might be logical or at least obvious perhaps, but in these diagrams, the orange colors represent the sheriff detention, the blue colors represent the courts. Kind of simplistic, just courts and court support, and the yellow kind of being the public circulation. And for us, it made sense for us to take that detention and the potential of some of the sheriff's operations and place those on the lower level, and then have the courts on an upper level. We also looked then part of the functions could be nested into the hill and operate just fine. So we get some of the intake, some of the support pieces that could be on that side of the building. We have programmed the Sally Board to maintain kind of secure movement in and out for this. In this case, the Sheriff's Department, the Sheriff's Office proper is placed on this lower level. And there's some advantages to having them and their parking, their need for separate parking segregated to a lower level that also translates into the plan. Here's a three-dimensional view of that diagram. We've now kind of turned your orientation, so you're looking at it as if you're uphill, and you see the two floors. We have provided stairs for exiting, and there are some elevators to move some movement up and down depending on how we're servicing the building. Again, we have the courts. There's a dedicated elevator in the red zone that would bring in custody up to the courts, and it's actually in a shared spot between the court and the hearing room. That's really our best practice. We keep everybody separated, public, staff, as well as in custody movement. Everybody's separated, and they really would only come together within the courtroom proper. And so that's option A. Option B is very similar organization. It's just a more straightforward linear configuration. Again, the courts of this bar, we have the requisite chambers, some support space, dedicated circulation so that you can move from chambers into court. You don't pass the public realm. The clerk can move in a private circulation to the court. And again, it's all about maintaining secure operations for each of the different populations that are moving in the building. And then this has the same organization about the jail and the sheriff on the lower level. So here it is in a linear configuration, option B. Again, we've looked around kind of looking at the entry side or the top side of the building. And then we also looked at a way to organize the building that is maybe a little bit more sympathetic to some of the contours. So this places this angular form with the same organization and same distribution. So let me show you how these all come together. And we looked at how to best utilize the site. And we studied a number of options. But where we landed was to place here those three footprints now illustrated to scale on the site, as well as the square footages associated, or the footprints associated with the requisite parking. And diagrammatically, the way this works, there's kind of an upper shelf or upper tier that takes the access, really off of that leg that comes by the senior center, the mid-site, if you will, and it's up high. And so we get a plateau or a shelf of parking that's up high. The building is then accessed at the second floor. You drop down with the contours for the lower floor, and then that's served by a lower parking lot. That's where we also separate our starts to look at how that massing might come together, where we have a single story. This now looks at it from the parking side. So a single story on the upper level, double story on the lower level. You can kind of see how the building bridges between high and low. It's pretty simplified massing modeling. But a couple of things I think to note is that there's, it takes a good deal of the site. There's not a lot of leftover. I think there is room to expand. I think there's things you could do to grow this building on the site, but we are using a good chunk of it in order to satisfy these programmatic needs. So we actually looked a little bit harder at these next two options. So we're going to take a little bit further dive into how they might be developed. A logic, again, has this double-loaded tray parking on the higher shelf, all funneling to a primary building entrance. And then the main facade is out on the roadway. We get daylight into the offices, daylight into the courtrooms, potentially the hearing room, with a lower level dedicated for the parking. And these are some preliminary massing studies looking at how that daylighting at level 2. Again, this is still really preliminary, but this idea of, introducing that common aid that announces the public entry from the top. So these views are not looking from, the public side. Clearly, it's a single story up here, and then everybody's funneled to the primary public entrance, and then all the staff are moving at the lower level, arriving at that. So the little wrinkle here is just this. It's hard to repress, but the contours actually have this kind of natural bend. It's not unlike the bend in the road, and so this is really tuned to that, so that lower footprint of the building on the lower level really nets perfectly into the contours of the site. Now, I'd say we've got to verify some of these because some of this data is extracted from a couple different places, but if we were developing the design, I think there's some room to tune this. And again, that would lend itself to a slightly different analysis of the massing. Here is a simpler building form where we really have a single slope roof that rises as you go from high to low. The higher the site out towards and you get, again, a nice expression on the street, two-story, with able to get great daylight into the office areas of the court. And then on the public side, we're just announcing that entryway as kind of a separate kind of form and mass with columns, and again, that's the collector that brings it all in. We studied in this model this idea of sneaking some clear story lighting along the public spine within that upper level. Again, there's lots of room for us to develop these architecturally, but I think from what excited us is that there's really interesting ideas that I think could work with the building form and with the site. I think they kind of really log together in a way that makes some sense. It's pretty efficient use of how the site, the building would. We believe this is maybe one of the most efficient ways to kind of get your program within this in this site, and it's a logical separation of courts versus the detention and sheriff's component. That is our analysis to date. I getting information about what the value of this might be. I think for purposes of our study at this level of detail, there's not really a appreciable difference between the three different ideas here right now, square foot to square foot probably, and our site strategy in terms of the grading. Those improvements would be similar across the scheme. So, anyway, we just wanted to share where we're at and give you a chance to weigh in on how this might work for you.
Well, thank you. Very, very nice. Very good. I'll reach out and see if there's any of the commissioners have any questions. Anything you guys would like to add, or can you hear me, Dennis, Barbara? You guys hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. Just to kind of throw something out there. So listening to you guys on option C, that it sounded like you feel by you guys doing your design and your study of the property that, and again, you also said there's not a whole lot of difference. The building is the building. It's 58,000 or so square feet. But it seemed like maybe option B and maybe even C more utilizes the property the best, and also probably is more efficient with construction materials, say with moving dirt or the parking lot, a little more room with the building closer to the parking lot lessens the amount of work might go into that, so to speak. Is that kind of correct of how I assumed what you were referring to on option C? Is that correct?
No, I think that's spot on. That's correct. I think that C may be better than the others, works with the contours a little bit better, and the more we can align with that, then I think the more efficient and it also places the building and the parking in a better, I think, closer relationship, and that will also reduce the more efficient we can be, the less cost to spend on some site improvements that way. And again, there may be opportunities to improve these, obviously, as things go forward, but I think that we're comfortable that within this range, we've got a good building, and I think that if we were to pick, our recommendation would be that, the efficiency of the C might actually be more benefit than some of the other ideas. I know that there's a simple, the linear scheme that's all straight. There's this school of thought that says, okay, that's got to be the cheapest, but it does force you to do a couple extra things on the site, a little bit different, and so I don't know. They might point out the washing, but I think that we have some. But your analysis is correct. I think this has some efficiencies that would be a benefit.
Yeah, that's kind of what we were.
Ask a question. This is Jay. Certainly.
I take it that each diagram building support these restrooms.
Yeah, the building support is a variety of things, so it includes, basic, it does include the restrooms. There's some, under building support, we also include the public lobby, the screening, equipment, the footprint that we need for that. There's also some mechanical and storage spaces that are janitor's closets and those kind of things. They're in that number as well.
So the movement of people from courtrooms, each courtroom is designed to get them to someplace inside the front door of the courtroom. It appears to me that if people need to congregate, they're going to move to the lobby section of visitors' not in the room to congregate in the hall right outside the entrance. Is that kind of the theory of that?
Well, turning and coming in on the opposite end. So I think that you could get a linear seating configuration that allows people to separate. And, you know, we want to be able to keep contested parties away from each other, give them an option so they're not really concentrated. And I think this would do that. The other benefit is because it's, you know, it's a straight shot, line of sight. It's pretty easy for wayfinding, so you target loss because everything is on that spine. And again, you're really just looking, it's a mall, really. You have entrances left and right, and we would just have a kind of a hierarchy of entrances, doors, and signage that would lead you down to where you needed to go.
And there's one entrance that's the key thing for the upper level course. You're kind of in the cut off, you're not really kind of in the other doors.
That is correct. We have exits at each end, which are required, but those would not really, you know, they're not accessible from the outside. Everybody, again, I don't want to jump ahead, it's always a touch point about staff coming into the building, and we have lots of time to get into those discussions. But the intent from a secure, you know, we're going to start with our best practice. We want everybody screened before they come in the building. And so we provided a lobby that's going to give us a way to get you in and out of the elements, get you through a screening protocol. And, you know, I'll tell you, there's some exciting things happening in screening that are maybe a little bit less obtrusive than the traditional airport version that you're so familiar with that might be appropriate for us to consider. And, you know, there are even overlays about, you know, how COVID impacts screening and how we can actually supplement the screening with some metrics that, you know, start to look at, you know, body temperature and such that you're predicting. There's lots of stuff you can do these days, and we're just giving you a footprint that gives you the flexibility to do that. And I answered, that was a very long answer for, it was a simple question. Everybody comes through one spot.
Thank you.
And by you saying that, this is Jason again, by you saying that, it also kind of, you put in as far as taking people's temperatures, we've done the best we could, obviously in today's world, with taking into consideration the social distancing, correct? As best you can.
Yeah, I will tell you the one struggle that most of our clients have is how to do juries. You know, because the square footages that we're allocating when we did programming were pre-COVID, and so it's difficult for us to. And I'm not sure that you know. There's some things we could do in this plan that are probably less, you know, there are trade-offs on things, so we could get into that. But I think that this is probably more a traditional plan, and if we were to look at COVID implications, capacities of jury assembly, capacities, or how you would set up jurists within the trial court, there's some things we could do, look at, but, you know, they're probably not illustrated in these diagrams.
I think that's the challenge, honestly, even with larger counties, with the distance that's required even for a jury, say a jury assembly or something like that. So that's a challenge that's going to be there, I think, going forward, at least for that part of it.
I think you're right, and I think some folks have got some ideas, but you know, my sense is that nobody's really got a perfect solution yet. There's some we're looking at we're working right now with Foresight juries are tough, looking at a plan where they, just use the jury Sunday space, which is flexible, and give the juries what's hard.
Okay, last question I have, this is again, and just so the commissioners know, the number of parking spaces, that 225 that we talked about, is that all inclusive of above the upper and the lower secure parking?
Yes, it is, yeah.
Okay.
And the other thing is, there's no magic between how we isolated, we have about 50 spaces in the lower area, which is, sort of the, potentially the secure parking, the shared parking, with about 50 spaces there, and then the rest of the 220 is on the upper level. I would say that there's really no magic behind it. We can kind of tweak those numbers as we need to. If that's not the right balance, some of these park spaces that are down on the lower level could potentially move along the entrance driveway, and be on the upper level. As Doug mentioned earlier, there's a possibility for, some overflow grass parking over in the area, the north of the 911 center. So, that includes further the detention and the sheriff as well as the court. But there's not, a magic right now behind how they're separated.
Okay, very good. No other questions?
Yeah, I do.
This Dale?
I want to see a view, if you've got a slide, and I'm going up Fort Hill Road, I want to see what I would consider the front of that building. Because we've got this beautiful backside of the building with these columns and everything, and I'm looking right at the DP substation. I want to see what's like from the street.
Would be right there. If you've got an option pulled up, probably right there, that's showing guide up, it's circling it now. That would be the front side of the facility. And this is like going to EMS, right?
Right, as you climb Fort Hill, this thing would sit, and again, it bends actually kind of nicely in that it presents itself, and it's going to be sitting up high. Again, this is looking at, again, a combination of, these are images are, I don't know if I have a better shot, I don't think I do. But we were looking at a combination of that masonry, where we could introduce some of that stuff, part of the existing court, and then areas of glazing in between. So again, a more of a punched masonry, and that would lend itself to how we would introduce the smaller scale windows that are associated with the detention at the lower level. And so that's the other thing that this plan does, and I don't know if this, but there's this little bump on the plan. That is our jury deliberation suite, which again, when we think about courts, we think about honoring how the public are participating, and so it's nice that we have this, that space out there that gets lots of money for them, and just again honors and celebrates the public participation in the process. But I think there's a lot of room for how we can develop that expression along Fort Hill.
I don't like that. I don't like the front of the building basically
Looks like the back.
is looking at, you're going to have a big retaining wall, and then above there you got the Duke Energy substation. To me, the street side of that building should be the side that says, hey, this is the Graham County Courthouse, instead of having to drive around behind the building
that's certainly something we can look at and talk about, making it more appropriate for a look of Graham County and the court system as you drive up the hill. We could look at the facade having some attributes of that, correct?
I can see it from here.
Yeah, and I was a little trouble hearing, but I think that your comments are at least for what we've developed so far, I think that that's a valid criticism that it may not have enough articulation or to, if I were to criticize it, and I don't know if this is how you're feeling, but, it may just be a little too generic, and that if it's a specific building, it may need, we may need to have a little bit more articulation, a little bit more energy. It's easy on the top side with the entryway and columns. Those are kind of classic markers, and really align with, I think, how many of us think about the justice. And it's a bit more literal reference to the existing building, but it's a little less so on the side. It's a valid concern, and again, this is really more of a test fit than a design, and I think that if we were to select this or go forward, I think there's plenty of room for us to make this feel like you're comfortable that it's appropriate for county building and for the justice center. I think there's some opportunities here, but I would agree that we haven't quite pushed it.
My perception of it is that it's backwards. If you could turn the back side around to the front, which I'm not sure the space would accommodate that, but that would be what I would want to see.
I mean, to me, it would look better
That's right.
if that was facing Fort Hill Road. Could you shift the building back towards the retaining wall below the substation and then put the parking?
The problem, we talked about that the last time we were with them, and the problem is the fill that we would have to do and the amount of cut and fill outside. Then you can't really lift it up. Then you become, everything's on the bottom floor and everybody has to travel up to the top floor. And now you're digging out that hole. There's a lot of dirt moving, digging out that whole hill there.
I mean, I like the front, but...
And that's my thinking, is maybe doing like Connie's saying, that to your point too, would be take an entry, put more of an approachable entryway and put it on this side, and make this more, plain is really not the word to use, but not necessarily as dressed up, but something to look at coming up. And as I said, I would like to see it match some of the stonework that we have on the other buildings that are up there. The senior center, 911, and transportation have some stonework that would match that on the front as you drive up. And then more of a, and it doesn't necessarily, it can be some columns, but not necessarily be an entryway. It can still be made to look that way, but relevant to that front of the facility.
Can you guys show the option B, like from the street side?
So, yeah, B has that, a little bit of what you just described, because we took that center form and it comes all the way across. And yet, there could be, some expression of the structure and column that are reminiscent of what you saw up here at on the upper level. So that's what I do think that there is a way for us to enhance that. I think just if you call it a backwards, because that is kind of how we are. You enter on one side, but you're expressing the other, and
I think B would even look better if that front was, basically made into an area like a public park almost, with benches and tables where people could sit and have lunch and have a nice entrance to the building from that side, unless there's some prohibition about entering from that side. I mean, I like the concept.
Do you mean in addition to the entry up on the back or in place of?
Well, not necessarily as a main type of entrance, but a way for people to come and go from the building. There could be, seating or whatever out front that, where people could go to relax, have lunch, whatever. Just something to make it look more appealing from the street side, because that one view, it's kind of like it looks like a nice warehouse as you're going up the street,
Looks like the backside of the building.
or the backside of the hospital or something. To me,
And I think and Dale, you can correct me if I'm wrong, and for the lack of a better option, because I haven't been to a lot of courthouses, but if you think in terms of what I think he's talking about is, say, the Pentagon, the interior part of the Pentagon is a place for people to walk, come out during lunch, sit amongst themselves. You can't enter it from the outside, but you can enter it once you enter the building if they want to go out and sit, maybe there's a smoking area down there, I don't smoke, but that would give employees a place to go outside and walk and do that in the front of the facility, eat their lunch, have a picnic table or a little awning of some sort built out in front. That's kind of what I think Dale's looking at with his suggestion.
Okay. So the challenge, when you start to enter from both sides, then you have to really think about how you're going to screen from both sides.
Right.
And you really, I would say for the scale, you don't want to duplicate. And it's difficult to get you from, in a secure way, not get you from one side to the other outside of the screening stuff. So that's the challenge, is to figure out how to, make that screening as efficient as we can.
I think
But I do think you could do to that side that, again, are amenities that dress it up, that may not necessarily invite public entry.
Yeah, I would prefer from this setting that it wasn't another entry into I would rather it be what he's talking about, be accessible, but you'd have to come in around the upper side to access it, whereas employees would have access it as employees in the facility. I wouldn't want it to be a second main entry into the
No,
building.
I'm not encouraging that.
No. Yeah.
I'm trying to think of a way to make it look like
Right.
something.
The front of the building.
Yeah, I just think that's a little unusual. Do we have any idea how high that retaining wall is going to be?
You guys know how, I don't have the program as far as being able, if it was in a program, I could pull up and do the measurements, but do you guys know what it looks like as far as a retaining wall, what height it would be, how glaring that would be from the road, just right off the top of your head?
Well, a lot of it's going to depend on, our final configuration of parking. Because if we don't have some of these spaces that are really close to the wall, we do a lot with grade, the farther away would work. And again, I think Doug mentioned one of the first next steps that we want to do is get a really good, accurate survey, because we're kind of guessing some of this. But I'm thinking, it's probably in the 6 to 10 foot range. The building itself with this two-story configuration, that kind of lends itself to it being its own retaining wall. And then when we get to the north and the south ends is when we have to introduce this extra wall to deal with our grade. But again, if some of those
think that the model probably has just a 10-foot right now, to simplify massing of that site. Because the contours, you know, we are on the upper parking, we're at elevation 2090, and I think this is 2080, so there's a 10-foot drop. And I think that, you know, Liz is correct, you could mitigate a lot of that with some slope, so it might be a simplification. So it may be too dramatic to show, you know, that as a 10-foot high wall, because you could grade up and eliminate some of that height. So I think that's a valid kind of concern that we don't want. Well, I think there's a couple of things. You don't want to visually see, you know, this wall, and you don't want to spend a lot of money on the wall too. You know, I think we want to put money where we're going to appreciate it and people are going to value it. And a retaining wall is, if we can lower them or mitigate them, that would be the. People have some, but I think we could mitigate their visual impact and then also their impact to the cost.
Right. That makes sense. Any other questions, concerns? I think at the end of the day, and I don't want to speak for you, for your team, this is Jason again, we at some point need to figure out an option so that you can lock these design features down into and finalize the project, correct, at some point?
Well, we would like to pick up one of these so that we could do just a little bit more and give you a better feel and certainly take into account these kind of feedback we received today and maybe show you a little bit more realistically how we could do it that would incorporate the feedback. So yeah, if there was, you know, any consensus, and again, we were leaning between B and C, and honestly, maybe, you know, to be fair, there are parts, you could also take pieces of what you see on C and make them work on B and vice versa. So the roof and the scale matching configurations are not really tied necessarily to the geometry. So there's really a couple of things. Is there any preferred relative to the geometries between perhaps B and C? And then any preferences relative to, you know, B had this, you know, articulated, actually the roof kind of sweeps up from the entry and this piece goes across. And C, it does the opposite. The roof kind of runs from low to high along the length of the building. Those are the primary differences between the two. All of your comments, you know, noted and would be addressed, but I think that's those are the primary kind of nuance between them.
Okay. Well, I think we'll press forward with the meeting, and I'll follow up with a phone call with you guys, and we'll kind of lock that down and get you some answers.
That's fantastic, and we will send you this PowerPoint deck. I think we have a reduced version that we can email you, so
That'd be great.
we'll send it to you as this meeting's over. You can distribute it and talk about it as you need, and then we look forward to following back up with you.
That would be great. I really appreciate it. Anybody, anything else before I let them go? Thank you again so much. Wonderful presentation. We like what we're seeing. This gets our minds flowing and wrapping around what we want to see on the property. Apologize for the late delay. We didn't know there might have been a problem with the projector, but like you said, it's 2020. So.
Thank you all. Appreciate your
Thank you.
attention and your feedback.
Thank you so much. I'll talk to you guys real soon.
Lynn, stay on the line.
So we need to get a survey done, and we need to decide that property over there.
There doesn't need to be a survey.
Right, and now through there. We need a, before this project gets started and do it across the road, we need to get whatever it takes to put all that dirt, fill a hole in it. Yeah.
There doesn't need to be a survey. Aaron just did a complete topo, brand new survey, so I'll have a conversation with them. I've sent them everything he sent me. And honestly, if you look at what they've done there, they're showing the grade of all the way over to the EMS building and where the senior center is. So let me find out what it is that they're talking about needing. I don't know what else we could do. It's as accurate as Aaron and his equipment is. So they had it. They had everything new. And I'm talking about recent. Within what, January or February is when we finished the survey. I don't know what else they might need, but I'll follow up and see, because that doesn't sound right to me.
When do we need to decide which A, B, or C?
I think as soon as we can, because keep in mind, we went past the time frame, and a lot of this is COVID, that we wanted to have this project done. There's a time frame that comes with these contracts, and I made a clock on my computer, and we way past that, we've blown it out of the water. So, and in all fairness, that's with everything that's happened, they went into lockdown too. So, just as soon as we can, however you guys want, and I say that to say it delays, the longer we keep talking about it and seeing what we want to do, it delays the outcome of this design, so that we can put it in approval and then get it to somebody that's actually take bids for an architectural team to put this thing into play in motion with the
Off
actual.
the first city, I think they can make that roadside facade look anywhere they want to, regardless of not building shaped. Not the first city.
I don't understand why there's such a large space that's dedicated as jury assembly.
That's for them.
Exactly where
That's where they have to.
When they have 300,
When they
Yeah,
bring
there's a
in
lot of people.
over 200.
when they bring in 300 people at one time.
That's
to
where
pick
they'll
the
do
jury.
it.
For
the jury selection, yeah.
Jury selection.
I wonder if that's what it was.
Maybe they did that.
If it's
Before
a-
every
if it's a
trial.
Superior
Yeah,
Court
before
jury
jury
trial,
trial.
like the one we're getting ready to have to do in November, if the Chief Justice allows it, we're gonna have to bring over 250 people into the gym
Jury pool.
for the jury
Yes.
pool.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then that's one reason that they mentioned that that can be like a multi-purpose room, so that it's not just dead space between these big jury trials.
Well, I just wondered, I thought that might be it.
Yeah.
That's one.
Which that was a shocker to me until I started having to move court. You know, there was that.
Think about it, all the stuff we've had to do with this trial is basically because of the jury, everything we've had to do.
Yeah.
It's bringing those folks in.
Sure, not only jury selection, but jury deliberation.
Right.
Another problem.
And even then, with using the gym, they're gonna have to do it in I think two shifts, because even as big as that gym is, they figured, I think, only like 140 could be in there socially distanced.
Yeah.
So they'll have to bring people in over time. It's gonna be a real pain.
Which one do y'all like? A,
Dale,
B,
can I
or C?
ask a question?
Dale, Jay
Sorry.
has a question.
Yeah, please do.
I think I understood what you were getting at in terms of the visuals of the courthouse. If you look at option B, if you just switch the upper parking level with the building, just switch them in those two places and have the front of the building pointing toward the parking lot that was located where the building was planned in accordance with their plan, wouldn't that do what you were talking about, just switch the two right there?
Can't do it because of grade, we can't.
You're still gonna have two-story buildings facing the road, and there's no way
Looks like the backside of the building.
the only way you're gonna be able to do is fix a fake front.
Facade.
And I discussed for it.
Yeah.
That's basically it.
Right.
It's gonna have to be like a facade.
All the other options, find another piece of land,
Yeah.
faces the road.
Build a fake front on the backside of it.
Or move a bunch of dirt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's just crazy.
Which that's gonna be add to your cost, the more civil and, that type work is gonna add to the cost. The other pieces, as Jason's alluded to, is the timing. You know, Jacob, I'm sure you can attest that it's the cost of building, just because of COVID, is raising exponentially. So we want to take our time and do it right, but we also need to realize that the longer this goes, the more expensive it's going to be to get the same result. So that's the thing,
I get all that, I just don't like that. I don't like walking out the front of that beautiful building and seeing a retaining wall and a substation.
Right.
I get that.
It's legitimate.
I didn't like that either. I get that.
It's legitimate. But that's what we're doing here. Keep in mind, we can still go back with them with changes to get a facade on the front, or actually an approach visual is what we call it, going up that hill. It needs to look, it needs to represent the county, but it needs to be, if we're putting money into something, it doesn't need to look like the back of a building.
You know, it's going to last for 75 more years, I hope. 100. It's just at least 100. I mean, you mentioned field dirt. That was why you couldn't put the parking routes everywhere. I mean, there's parking lots all over the United States built on field dirt.
Yeah, it's not so much the field dirt as you change, if you put the building all the way in the back of the lot, which we talked about then too, is now you've become still a two-story building and everything becomes on the lower end. And now you've cleared out all that dirt, you've done all that civil work, and you've got a two-story building with everything on the lower side to get to the top floor. You know, you're going to go into a building where the jail and everything is on the bottom floor and have to access it.
Well, I think when you do that, you reverse the stacking. You put the court down here on the bottom and you put the jail on top.
That was never a good idea just because of the problems that Cherokee, the tribe, has with their jail. I think they put it on the top floor, and when they decided they weren't happy, they flooded the place, and now everything below it is having problems with getting wet when they had problems inside the jail.
Mm-hmm.
Just going off of what they said.
Yeah, you know, that sort of that can happen anywhere, but I just don't like the way that's going to look from the street.
Well, I think that's a problem we can fix with just design.
I don't know.
I don't know that building around is just gonna cost us more money, just like building it to COVID spec. I mean, we're gonna build millions and millions of our building based on the pandemic, are we gonna be in the pandemic now?
Exactly. Yeah.
Are we gonna cost the taxpayers money? But, I mean, I don't know, I'm not gonna have that conversation, to be honest with you.
So do we want A, B, or C? There's not much difference in A and B, or A and C. What is the real difference in A and C?
It's, A points towards the road. Yeah, it points towards the road, front, that like, I don't know, another week, build houses, sometimes we call those where it's out. You know, the top of the ridge points out and it goes back into the house called back. For lack of a better term, you have the front of that back wing points towards the road. Opens it up in the back a little bit.
B is,
C goes with the curve of the road.
Yes,
A,
yes,
that's
that's
not.
correct. It's more, and it sits back, that's the building, and to be fair with what Dale's saying about moving the building back, C actually has the building more towards the contour of that holler right there. The back wing is back towards the substation, which is the way that contour of that ground is. So it utilizes the space a little bit better, with a little bit less civil work on the back side of the building. Puts you closer to the parking lot, although you can move the parking lot in as close as you want. It gives you a little bit more room, you know, with the front of the building and the north side of the building, so to speak, for future. Or he's talking about a walk area around the lower side of that.
what, A, B, or C? Anybody got a suggestion?
My first thing,
Jacob says C. Keith says C. Connie says C.
Lynn,
C. I think that's the first one.
Yes, ma'am.
Which one do you prefer?
A, B, or C?
A, B, or C?
I will be fine.
Got 1A and 3 Cs. Sounds like we're going with C. I don't like either one of them.
Well,
I'm good with either. I like that.
and you know, unless we realistic facade, the backside. It is the backside, but you like good fun.
So aesthetic dressing on that side.
Are you talking about going up?
Pardon?
I think they wanted C, Lynn, but they're going to, yeah,
That one we talked about the other night?
it is. But they want a different view.
We want it to look like a front side of it.
They want it to look like a front side, even if it is a facade. They want to dress that view up as you're coming up Fort Hill, right?
Look like.
To look
Yeah.
like the
I
Justice
think
Center.
they could put a little gable type facade up there and make it look a
Yes.
little bit like the old courthouse, even if it's non-functional.
Yeah.
It wouldn't-
And keep
Lynn
in-
said he agreed with that.
Okay.
Keep in mind, this is just a footprint.
Yeah.
We can do, as Jacob has said, we can do different things with the design. This is a footprint utilization of the facility on the property for the most part. And access, like you said, I mean, to me, it's important that there's secure parking for the sheriff and the jail alongside. I like that.
Yeah.
Sally Port, and personally, it needs to be figured originally with electronic gates and a gated system to where you have to be able to get in there. Now, they can leave it open for people they know may be coming, whatever the case is, but that's completely secure from anything else that happens. So I like the jail being on the bottom side and having that secure. Driving around all the way to the, keep in mind, that upper parking lot and this whole facility doesn't even touch parcel B, which is completely north and west of the 911 center. We still have all that for future parking if we need it. So I like the design of that, the way that efficiency for the property, just that parcel A property. So we can work on the design part of it and come up with different facades and anything you guys like. I do like Dale's idea, however, I don't know what that adds to it, of just what do they call that, a tri-scape? They do these in cities now. They have like a tri-scape area where they just fix for people to walk around and has different things inside that area. But it just needs to be accessed from inside the building so we know who's there. And a place for employees.
You gotta have somewhere where people can smoke, throw their cigarette butts, and throw their coffee cups down. It would look out of place if we didn't have one. No, I'm just kidding. All right, anybody got anything else? If not, we'll move on to item number 3. Take that as a note. All right, everybody's had a chance to review, the necessary people have reviewed the ambulance bid. And it looks like they were saying we should take the one from Custom Truck and Body Work.
Down those bids.
Okay. The motion that we accept, bid for 222, 321.
Second in favor. Lynn,
Lynn, are you in favor of accepting the ambulance bid from Custom Truck and Body Works?
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank
all
you.
right, very good. Ms. Garland, your old business.
We did have our meeting at 2 with the school board.
Right.
Been communicating with, Mrs. Knight. She's gonna have notebooks provided with, I think, hopefully the information that we're looking for with the, questions regarding architecture and engineering and cost. I didn't know if the board had anything else that they wanted to address so that I can make sure we hit all the marks this afternoon.
Well, I space. But I think since we're spending 1.4 million of taxpayer money, maybe even more, and we have regulations that we have to abide by, whether they have to go to those same rules or not. And they're gonna have to accommodate us, I think. You know, if the law requires us to bid a project out, you know, how do we bridge that gap? And I don't know the answer to that. You know, maybe Jay does, and Jay's still with us.
Jay, you still on?
I'm still on, but I can't hear a thing Dale said.
Okay, I'll try to speak directly into the microphone. Does that help?
Yes.
Okay. Jay, we've talked about this in the past, about the way the schools can do their capital projects without having to follow the same rules that the county does. But we've got a 1.4 million investment here, and we've already run into issues about trying to do the financing and so forth, and you know, because we're basically a partner in this, as far as monies that we spend, and you know, the county money, we have to go by whatever rules the state has established for us on capital outlay projects, do we not? Or do we just join in with the school and let them do whatever they want to do? I don't know the answer to that.
I know that that is an issue, Dale, and I don't know specifically the answer to that issue, but I can do some research and come up with an answer for you.
Yeah. I think we need to know, because
We didn't have right now.
they're moving full speed ahead, and of course we'll know it after this meeting whether or not they've done, you know, I'm concerned about the foundation and the core samples of the soil and things like that over there, especially after what went on when they built that school. But Becky has a lot of other concerns. Go ahead, Becky. And
So the, two things that I'm gonna have to get in place, before anything occurs forward is the capital project ordinance, which I brought in August, and we decided to table for this meeting, as well as the financing resolution, so that if we spend any money previous to getting the loan, I can repay the county. And, you know, I did some research in the state procurement manual. I do know that, you know, they are going to put this out for, you know, for formal bid for the construction phase. And the reading I did, Jay, you can correct me, but the reading I did was that professional services, such as architecture and engineering, can be procured via RFP or, you know, without doing formal bidding. The other thing that we have to be very, very careful about is that we're going to have to finance, as we discussed in previous meetings, and when the Board of Commissioners signed off to the grant, that this is going to be financed. So my concerns are making sure we keep everything in the proper order. We will have to have bids in hand to go after and get the loan. I've been working with Davenport, and Mitch and I have been going back and forth for another phone call, hopefully either later this week or early next week, to get that ball rolling, assuming the boards come to an agreement on the final plans and everything. Then that's going to take time, because when you go out for $1 million or $1.4 million plus closing costs, we're going to have to go out for almost like a bank bid process, like we did with P&J, which could take several weeks, you know, even up to 8 to 10 weeks to get those bids out and vetted, and then getting the financing in place. But then it has to be approved by local government commission. So they'll have to wait for a commission board meeting to get that final approval. So my chief concern is to get that communicated out that, you know, because we haven't done a school financing other than the refinancing. The Q's Act was 2006, the school was in the 90s, we did the refi, that didn't impact any work that they were doing to help the school board give a timeline that's going to accommodate everything that the county has to do to get this money in place. Because I don't have this moving forward to front, especially with the pandemic. You know, I have to preserve every bit of fund balance I can. I think it would have been a different conversation 6 months ago, or maybe could have fronted it and then back financed it. But I think that's going to be the important thing that I have to get across this afternoon is we got to work this very methodically, and yes, we do have to get the bids, but then we got to have the time to get the financing in place for the match. That's where I'm at. And I'll bring the state procurement policy. I think I brought it a couple of meetings ago and we discussed it very vaguely with me this afternoon so that we can go through that.
We've done a few of these, and it is a bit long process.
It is. It's not something that we
The
can
finance
figure
is
out.
what I'm talking
The
about,
financing, yes, it's complicated.
which is all I really understand.
Things that have to happen from the regulatory piece to make sure we're in accordance with state law.
Yes, sir. I don't know what our relationship with them is supposed to be today. Again, we're spending however much money we're spending, and if we were doing this ourselves, we would have to be doing it different from what they are doing up to this point. And they've got an architectural firm already hired.
Oh, they're close. I talked to Scott the other day, they're just a couple of weeks out from construction.
So, you know, we are. I don't know.
I mean, they basically got it designed, they're done, they've had it reviewed, everywhere except on the local level.
And I don't know what to do. Are we obligated to live by our standards, and what's the deal? I don't know. It just seems to me that they're in a big
Don't we need that
hurry.
answer before we have a meeting?
So, Jay, do you want me to, send you that piece of the procurement manual real quick?
Yeah.
Okay. When we adjourn?
Anyway, I guess we'll know more here in a little while. Anyway. Anything else that's going on that we don't know?
I'll smooth there. When I show up today, everything's set in the same.
You got anything in closed session? I think we're at that point.
The meeting
Something else.
to September the 29th at 5 p.m.